Hello viewers, and welcome to the Ghastly Journal. I'm Edward Blackwood, and tonight, I'm going to share a story that altered my perception of what exists beyond the veil separating our world from whatever lingers in the shadows. Before we begin, a word of caution: what you are about to hear might very well keep you awake tonight, so proceed with care. It all began last September. My sister Claire and I found ourselves the inheritors of our grandmother's estate, a Victorian mansion settled in the misty hills of New England. I hadn't set foot in the place since I was 12 years old. In the 2 decades that had passed, my memories had dwindled into mere fragments. The scent of potpourri, the endless corridors, and most vividly, the portraits. Ah, the portraits. Even in my childhood, I found them unsettling. Generations of the Blackwood family, rendered in oil and canvas, their eyes seeming to follow you as you moved through the room. There was great-grandfather William, with his stern scowl beneath a magnificent mustache. Aunt Josephine, with her tight-lipped smile that never quite reached her eyes. And most disturbing of all, the twins. 2 little girls in matching dresses, painted sometime in the 1890s, their faces eerily blank. When Claire and I arrived on that rainy afternoon, the house had stood vacant for nearly 6 months. The executor of grandmother's will, a Mr. Peterson, met us with a ring of ancient iron keys and a stack of paperwork. "No one's touched a thing since your grandmother passed," he told us, handing over the keys. She was quite insistent about that in her will. Claire raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like grandmother," she said. "Particular to the very end." Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses, a nervous gesture. "There's something else," he added. "She left specific instructions that nothing in the house was to be removed or altered. Especially the portraits." "The portraits," I finished for him. He nodded, looking relieved I had said it. "Yes, precisely. They're quite valuable, of course, but her instructions were emphatic." Claire and I exchanged a glance. Our grandmother had always been eccentric, but this seemed excessive, even for her. Still, we nodded our agreement, signed the final documents, and Mr. Peterson left us there, alone with our inheritance, a sprawling 3-story mansion filled with antiques, dust, and, we would soon learn, family secrets. "Well," Claire said, dropping her suitcase in the foyer, "home sweet home." I looked up at the portrait of our grandmother hanging above the grand staircase. She looked regal and composed, nothing like the warm woman who had baked us cookies and told us ghost stories by the fire. In this painting, her eyes seemed to hold a distinct warning. "Let's get settled," I said, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. "I'll take the east wing, if you're okay with the west." Claire agreed with a nod. Just like when we were kids, we spent that first day unpacking and reacquainting ourselves with the house. Despite the mustiness and the layer of dust covering everything, it was in remarkably good condition. The furniture was all high-quality Victorian and Edwardian pieces, the wallpaper expensive and only slightly faded. Grandmother had clearly spent a fortune maintaining the place. That evening, we met in the kitchen, the only room that had been modernized, sometime in the 1990s, and ordered pizza, neither of us feeling up to cooking after the long day. "Did you notice anything odd about your room?" Claire asked between bites. I paused. "Like what?" She shrugged, trying to appear casual, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "I don't know. The temperature, maybe. My room is freezing, even with the heat turned all the way up." "Mine's fine," I said. "But I did notice something about the portrait in the hallway outside my room. The one of Great-Uncle Edmund. I could swear it was facing a different direction when we first arrived." Claire put her pizza down. "That's not possible." I know. It's probably just my imagination. Or the light playing tricks." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Neither was I. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The house made all the usual noises old houses make: the settling of foundations, the expansion and contraction of old pipes, the whisper of wind through imperfect seals around the windows. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite identify. A rhythm beneath the random creaks and groans, almost like footsteps, pacing back and forth, back and forth. I told myself it was just the unfamiliar surroundings. I had lived in a downtown apartment for years. The sounds of nature and old architecture were foreign to me now. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep, only to be awakened hours later by a soft tapping on my door. I sat up, disoriented. "Claire." I called out. No answer came, just another gentle tap, tap. I glanced at my phone. 3:17 a.m. I slipped out of bed and crossed to the door, the hardwood floor cold beneath my bare feet. "Claire, is that you?" I called again, louder this time. Still, nothing. I hesitated, then opened the door. The hallway was empty and dark, lit only by the faint moonlight streaming through the window at the far end. And there, halfway down the corridor, hung the portrait of Great-Uncle Edmund. Even in the dim light, I could see that it was definitely turned at a different angle than before, now facing directly toward my room. I stood frozen, the hairs on my arms standing on end. Then I noticed something else. The portrait of the twins that hung at the opposite end of the hall. It had changed, too. The girls were no longer standing side by side. One of them had moved to the edge of the frame, as if trying to step out of the painting. "No," I whispered. "That's not possible." I closed my eyes, counted to 10, and looked again. Everything was as it should be. The twins stood side by side in the center of their portrait. Great-Uncle Edmund gazed off to the side, just as he had when we arrived. I was losing my mind. That had to be it. The stress of grandmother's death, the responsibility of the house, my own childhood fears coming back to haunt me, it was all playing tricks on my perception. I closed the door and went back to bed, but I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning over coffee, I debated whether to mention my midnight experience to Claire. She looked like she hadn't slept well either, dark circles under her eyes as she nursed her cup. "Bad night?" I finally asked. She nodded. "This is going to sound crazy, but, did you come into my room last night? Or maybe stand outside my door?" A chill ran down my spine. "No." "Why?" "I heard someone outside my door, around 3 o'clock in the morning. Breathing. Just standing there, breathing." I swallowed hard. "I heard knocking on my door at about the same time. When I checked, no one was there, but what?" I hesitated. I thought the portraits had moved. Just for a second. Then everything was normal again. Claire's face went pale. I had a dream about the portraits. They were whispering to each other, planning something. When I woke up, I could have sworn the one in my room, grandmother's sister, was smiling. She doesn't smile in that portrait. We sat in silence for a moment, the implications hanging heavily between us. "We're just tired," Claire finally said. "And this house has always been creepy. Remember how we used to scare each other with stories about the portraits coming alive at night?" I nodded, trying to smile. "You were convinced they held the souls of our ancestors. And you said they were possessed by demons," she countered. We laughed, the tension broken momentarily. But as we went about our day, continuing to sort through grandmother's belongings, cataloging furniture, making lists of repairs needed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every time I passed a portrait, I felt an almost magnetic pull to look at it. And every time, I could swear something was subtly different. A shifted gaze, a slightly altered expression, a hand that had moved a centimeter to the left. By evening, we were both on edge, though neither of us wanted to admit it. We decided to distract ourselves by exploring parts of the house we hadn't seen yet. The third floor had several rooms that had been closed off for as long as I could remember, storage spaces. Grandmother had always said there was nothing interesting up there. The largest of these rooms was locked with a heavy padlock that didn't match any of the keys Mr. Peterson had given us. "That's odd," Claire said, jiggling the lock. Why would grandmother lock this room and not give us the key? I shrugged. Maybe Mr. Peterson forgot. Or maybe it's in grandmother's desk somewhere. We can look tomorrow. As we turned to head back downstairs, I noticed something strange about the portrait hanging in the third-floor hallway. It was a painting of our great-grandmother as a young woman. Unlike the others, this portrait seemed faded somehow, as if the paint itself was disappearing in certain areas. Around her neck was a gold locket, painted with remarkable detail. And unlike the rest of the portrait, it seemed to gleam with an almost unnatural brightness. Claire, look at this, I said, pointing to the locket. Does that look normal to you? She leaned in, frowning. No. It looks almost three-dimensional, like it's sitting on top of the canvas rather than painted on it. I reached out, hesitated, then gently touched the locket in the painting. To my shock, my finger met something solid. Not flat canvas, but a real, physical object. What the hell? I gasped, drawing back. Claire's eyes widened. Try to pick it up. Cautiously, I reached out again and grasped the locket. It came away in my hand, leaving a blank space on the canvas where it had been. That's not possible, Claire whispered, echoing my thoughts from the night before. But the weight of the locket in my palm was undeniable. It was real, a small gold oval on a delicate chain, warm to the touch, as if it had been lying in sunlight, though the hallway was dim and cool. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a tiny key. Claire and I looked at each other, then at the locked storeroom door. Do you think, she began. Only one way to find out, I replied. The key fit perfectly into the padlock, which opened with a satisfying click. The door, however, took both of us pushing against it to budge. It seemed to have swollen in its frame, or perhaps hadn't been opened in a very long time. The room beyond was pitch black. I fumbled for a light switch on the wall but found nothing. Hold on, Claire said, pulling out her phone and turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a space unlike any other in the house. While the rest of the mansion was furnished and maintained, this room was completely empty except for a single object in the center, a large, ornate mirror in a gilt frame, covered by a heavy velvet cloth. The walls, however, were what immediately drew our attention. They were covered floor to ceiling in portraits. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all different sizes, but all in the same style as the paintings throughout the rest of the house. Some faces I recognized as distant relatives, but most were strangers to me. What is this place? Claire breathed, her voice barely audible. I shook my head, at a loss for words. The beam of Claire's flashlight jumped from portrait to portrait, revealing face after solemn face. But there was something wrong with these paintings. In the unsteady light, they seemed almost to move, expressions shifting from solemn to sorrowful to something approaching rage. We need more light, I said, my mouth dry. Claire nodded and started backing toward the door. I think I saw some flashlights in the kitchen. I'll go get them. I'll come with you, I said quickly, not wanting to be left alone in that room. But as we turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a thunderous bang. Claire screamed and dropped her phone, plunging us into total darkness. I heard her scrambling on the floor, trying to find it. After a few seconds of panic, the light returned, though dimmer now, her screen had cracked in the fall. The door, she gasped, directing the light toward it. I rushed over and tried the handle. It wouldn't budge. I threw my shoulder against the wood once, twice, but it was like hitting a brick wall. It's no use, I panted. It's stuck. Or locked somehow. That's not possible, Claire said, her voice rising with panic. There's no lock on this side of the door. She was right. I ran my hands over the smooth wood, finding no lock, no bolt, nothing that could be keeping the door shut. It was as if it had been sealed into its frame. Maybe there's another way out, I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. A window or another door we didn't see. Claire turned slowly, sweeping the flashlight around the room. There were no windows and no other doors that we could see. Just the portraits watching us with their painted eyes, and the covered mirror in the center of the room. "What's with the mirror?" Claire asked, moving toward it. "I don't know. Maybe we should leave it alone." But Claire was already reaching for the velvet cover. Before I could stop her, she pulled it off, sending a cloud of dust into the air. The mirror beneath was unlike any I had ever seen. The frame was gold, carved with intricate symbols that didn't look like any language I recognized. The glass itself was not reflective in the normal sense. Instead of showing our reflections, it seemed to contain a swirling darkness, like smoke captured between two panes of glass. "Claire, I don't think we should be touching things in here," I warned. She ignored me, leaning closer to the strange mirror. "There's something moving in there," she whispered. I reluctantly moved closer, peering into the dark glass. At first, I saw nothing but the shifting shadows. Then, gradually, shapes began to form, vague at first, then with increasing clarity. Faces. The same faces that surrounded us on the walls, but alive, moving, their mouths opening and closing as if they were speaking, though no sound came out. "Oh my God," Claire gasped. "They're trapped in there." I shook my head, backing away. "That's not possible. It's just a trick of the light, or some kind of optical illusion." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. There was something alive in that mirror, something conscious and aware. And now that we had uncovered it, it was aware of us, too. One face in particular seemed to push forward, becoming clearer than the rest. A woman, elderly but still beautiful, with familiar eyes that made my heart stop. "Grandmother," Claire whispered. The face in the mirror, her grandmother's face, seemed to register recognition. Her expression changed from one of passive observation to urgent warning. Her mouth moved, forming words we couldn't hear. "What is she saying?" Claire asked, leaning even closer. I squinted, trying to read my grandmother's lips. "Cover. Something about cover." "Cover the mirror," Claire suddenly exclaimed. "I think she's telling us to cover the mirror again." I lunged for the velvet cloth that had fallen to the floor. But before I could reach it, every portrait in the room seemed to change at once. The faces that had been merely watching now contorted in rage, mouths opening in silent screams, hands that had been posed sedately now clawing at the inside of their frames. And they were no longer silent. A low moaning filled the room, rising quickly to a cacophony of whispers, pleas, and threats, all overlapping until individual words were lost in the noise. Claire covered her ears, dropping the phone again. "Make it stop," she cried. I finally reached the cloth and threw it over the mirror. Instantly, the voices ceased. The room fell into a silence so complete it was as if the sound had never existed. Claire retrieved her phone with shaking hands. In the flashlight's beam, I could see that the portraits had returned to normal. Just paintings, nothing more. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. Claire nodded vigorously, and we both moved to the door. To my immense relief, the handle turned easily now, and the door swung open without resistance. We practically fell into the hallway, slamming the door behind us. I fumbled with the padlock, securing it quickly, then pocketed the key from the locket. "What was that?" Claire asked when we had both caught our breath. "What did we just see?" I shook my head, unable to form a coherent explanation. "I don't know. But I think Grandmother was trying to warn us." We retreated to the kitchen, the most modern and therefore least threatening room in the house. Over strong cups of tea and stronger shots of the whiskey we found in a cabinet, we tried to make sense of what we had experienced. "The portraits throughout the house," Claire said slowly. "They're connected to that room somehow. To that mirror." I nodded. "But what is it? Some kind of portal? A prison? Whatever it is, Grandmother knew about it. She locked it away, hid the key in a portrait. But why not just tell us about it? I asked. Why the mystery? Claire shrugged. Maybe she thought we wouldn't believe her. Or maybe she was protecting us. If we didn't know, we wouldn't be curious, wouldn't go looking. Well, that backfired, I muttered. We sat in silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Claire spoke up. We should research this place. There must be records, history. Grandmother kept everything. There's probably a file on the house somewhere in her study. It was a rational suggestion, a way to approach the irrational experience we'd had. I latched onto it eagerly. Good idea. We'll start tomorrow. For tonight, though. We sleep downstairs, Claire finished for me. Together, I added. In the living room. With the lights on, she said, managing a weak smile. Definitely with the lights on. That night, huddled on the couches in the living room with every light blazing, we did manage to get some sleep, though it was fitful and plagued by dreams. At least mine were. I dreamt of the mirror, of faces pressing against the glass from the inside, of hands reaching out to grab me and pull me in. I woke several times in a cold sweat, relieved to see the normal, portrait-free walls of the living room around me. Morning came with blessed normality. Sunlight streamed through the windows, birds sang outside, the smell of coffee filled the air as Claire, who had woken before me, brewed a pot in the kitchen. I've been thinking, she said as I stumbled in, still groggy, about the portraits and the mirror. I grunted, reaching for a mug. What about them? Well, remember those ghost stories grandmother used to tell us? About how some cultures believe that mirrors can trap souls. I paused, the coffee pot hovering over my mug. You think that's what's happening here? That the souls of our ancestors are trapped in that mirror? Claire shrugged. It's as good a theory as any. And it would explain the portraits. Maybe they're like, I don't know, anchors. Connections to the souls in the mirror. It sounded far-fetched, but after what we'd seen, I couldn't dismiss it outright. If that's true, then what do we do about it? Try to release them somehow. I don't know if that's a good idea, Claire said slowly. Whatever's in that mirror, grandmother locked it away for a reason. She had a point. So we just leave it? Pretend we never found it? No. We research. Like I said last night. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we do anything. And so, after breakfast, we made our way to grandmother's study, a cozy room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive oak desk. The desk was organized meticulously, with labeled folders arranged in alphabetical order. It took us only minutes to find what we were looking for, a thick folder labeled simply, "The House." Inside were documents dating back to the house's construction in 1879. There were architectural plans, records of renovations, and a detailed history of ownership. The house had been in our family since the beginning, passed down through generations, always to the eldest child. But it was a journal tucked in the back of the folder that caught my attention. The leather cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. The handwriting inside was tight and precise, belonging to my great-great-grandfather, William, the stern-looking man whose portrait hung in the dining room. The journal detailed the construction of the house, including one particular feature that had not appeared on any of the architectural plans, a hidden room on the third floor. Listen to this, I said to Claire, who was poring over renovation records. September 15, 1879. The special room is complete. The mirror has been installed according to the specifications. God help us if it should ever fail in its purpose. Claire looked up, frowning. Special room. That has to be the portrait room, right? But what does he mean by its purpose? I continued reading. The portraits will serve as windows and warnings. Through them, we will monitor those confined within. Should they ever begin to fade or change, we will know the mirror's power is weakening. Windows and warnings, Claire repeated. So the portraits are connected to the mirror. They let us see what's inside, and they warn us if something's wrong. I nodded, flipping through more pages of the journal. Much of it was mundane accounts of daily life, business dealings, family matters. But every few entries, there would be a reference to the mirror or those confined. Then I found an entry that made my blood run cold. April 3, 1880. It has happened again. Another victim of the mirror's influence. Found Eliza this morning in the special room, staring into the glass. Her eyes were blank, her expression one of rapture. She did not respond to my voice or touch. I covered the mirror, but it was too late. Within the hour, her body collapsed, empty of life and soul. I have commissioned her portrait to be hung with the others. God rest her soul, though I fear it rests nowhere near his kingdom. Claire had gone pale. The mirror, it takes people. Traps their souls. I kept reading, scanning through the journal for more information. There were more incidents like Eliza's, family members, servants, even visitors who had somehow found their way to the special room and fallen victim to the mirror's power. Each time, a portrait was commissioned afterward. This is insane, I muttered. If this journal is to be believed, every portrait in this house represents someone who was absorbed by the mirror. But that would mean, Claire trailed off, her eyes widening in horror. Grandmother, I finished for her. We saw her in the mirror last night. And her portrait was already hanging in the house when we arrived. That's not possible, Claire whispered. We attended her funeral. We saw her body. I didn't have an answer for that. None of this made sense. And yet, the evidence was mounting that something truly supernatural was happening in this house. We continued our research through the day, finding more journals, more accounts. The story that emerged was both tragic and terrifying. The mirror, it seemed, had come into our family's possession in the early 1870s, acquired by William during a trip to Eastern Europe. It had been sold to him as a curiosity, an antique with an interesting history of supposedly being able to capture and contain evil spirits. William, skeptical but intrigued, had brought it home. That's when the trouble began. The mirror seemed to exert an influence over the household, drawing people to it, compelling them to stare into its depths. Those who gazed too long became entranced, and eventually, their souls were pulled into the mirror, leaving their bodies empty husks that soon perished. Realizing the danger but unable to destroy the mirror, every attempt had failed catastrophically. According to the journals, William had the special room constructed to contain it. The portraits were a system of monitoring and remembrance, a way to keep track of those lost and to watch for signs that the mirror's containment was failing. This is why grandmother was so insistent that nothing in the house be removed or altered, I said as we pieced it all together. Especially the portraits. They're not just paintings. They're sentinels. Claire nodded slowly. And when they start to change, like great-grandmother's portrait with the locket, it means the mirror's power is fluctuating. The souls inside are getting restless. Or trying to escape, I added grimly. As if to punctuate my words, a loud thump came from somewhere above us, followed by the sound of breaking glass. We froze, looking at each other in alarm. That came from upstairs, Claire whispered. The portrait room? I don't know. Maybe. We debated what to do. The rational course would be to leave the house immediately, to get as far away from the mirror and its influence as possible. But something held us back. A sense of responsibility, perhaps. Or the nagging feeling that running away wouldn't solve the problem. If what the journal said was true, the mirror's power was growing, its containment weakening. If we left it unchecked, who knew what might happen? Besides, there was grandmother to consider. If her soul was indeed trapped in the mirror, could we simply abandon her? In the end, we decided to investigate the noise. Armed with flashlights and the knowledge gleaned from the journals, we made our way upstairs cautiously. The sound, we discovered, had come from my bedroom. A portrait, the one of the twins, had fallen from the wall, its frame shattered on the floor. But it wasn't the broken frame that held our attention. It was the portrait itself. One of the twins was missing from the painting entirely, leaving only a blank space where she had been. "Oh God," Claire breathed. "They're getting out." As if in response to her words, a child's laughter echoed down the hallway. High-pitched, innocent, but somehow wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. We spun around, but the hallway was empty. The laughter came again, farther away this time, moving toward the third floor. "We need to check the mirror," I said, my voice tight with fear. Claire nodded, her face resolute despite the terror I knew she must be feeling. We moved through the house quickly but cautiously, following the sound of occasional laughter. And as we got closer to the third floor, other noises as well, whispers, footsteps, the rustling of fabric. The door to the special room was still locked, the padlock secure. I fumbled with the key, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit it into the lock. When it finally opened, I braced myself for whatever might be waiting for us inside. The room was as we had left it, the covered mirror in the center, the portraits lining the walls. But something was different. The air felt charged, like the atmosphere before a lightning storm, and the cover on the mirror was moving slightly, as if something underneath was pushing against it. "The portraits," Claire gasped, shining her flashlight around the room. I followed her gaze and felt my heart sink. Many of the portraits now contained blank spaces where faces had been. Some were completely empty, just backgrounds with no subjects. "They're escaping," I said. "But how?" We covered the mirror. As if in answer to my question, the velvet cloth suddenly flew off the mirror. Though there was no wind in the sealed room, the mirror's surface was no longer filled with swirling darkness. Instead, it showed a scene, a room that looked very much like the one we were standing in, but filled with people, men, women, and children in clothing from different eras, all with the same haunted expressions. And at the front of the crowd, her hand pressed against the glass as if trying to push through, was our grandmother. "Grandmother!" Claire cried, rushing toward the mirror. I grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Don't get too close. Remember what happened to the others." She struggled against my grip. "But it's grandmother. We have to help her." "It might not be her," I warned. "Not anymore. Whatever is in that mirror, it wants out. It's using her image to lure us in." Claire stopped struggling, but her eyes remained fixed on our grandmother's face. "What do we do, then? We can't just leave them in there." I didn't have an answer. The journals had provided the history of the mirror, but little in the way of solutions. William and the generations after him had focused on containment, not liberation or destruction. As we stood there, uncertain, our grandmother's expression changed. The desperation faded, replaced by something harder, colder. Her mouth curved into a smile that held no warmth, no recognition. It was the smile of a predator. And then she spoke. Unlike the night before, this time we could hear her voice, though it sounded wrong, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison, using our grandmother's mouth as a conduit. "Children," the voice said, the words stretching out like taffy. "Sweet children, come closer. Grandmother misses you so." Claire took an involuntary step back. "That's not grandmother," she whispered. "No," I agreed. "It's not." The thing wearing our grandmother's face snarled, the pretense of warmth evaporating. "You will join us," it hissed. "All of you, in time. The barriers are weakening. We are coming through." As if to demonstrate, it pressed harder against the glass. And to our horror, the surface of the mirror began to bulge outward, like a membrane stretching to its breaking point. "We need to cover it again," I said urgently, looking around for the velvet cloth. But the cloth was nowhere to be seen. It had vanished as mysteriously as it had been removed. "What now?" Claire asked, her voice tight with panic. I thought frantically, trying to remember everything we'd read in the journals. There had been mentions of attempts to destroy the mirror, all of which had failed catastrophically. But what about the portraits? They were connected to the mirror somehow, serving as both windows and anchors. The portraits, I said suddenly. Maybe they're not just monitoring the mirror. Maybe they're powering it somehow. A connection between our world and whatever's inside. Claire caught on quickly. So if we destroy the portraits, we might weaken the mirror's hold. I finished her thought. It's worth a try. We backed out of the room carefully, never taking our eyes off the bulging mirror. The entity that had been masquerading as our grandmother was now joined by others, all pressing against the thinning barrier, their faces contorted with rage and hunger. I locked the door behind us, though I doubted it would hold them for long if the mirror's barrier failed completely. Where do we start? Claire asked as we hurried downstairs. The oldest portraits first, I decided. Great-great-grandfather William. He brought the mirror into the house. His connection might be the strongest. We found his portrait in the dining room, looking as stern and forbidding as ever. Without hesitation, I took it down from the wall and, with a silent apology to my ancestor, smashed it against the edge of the dining table. The effect was immediate and terrifying. A howl of rage echoed through the house, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The temperature plummeted, our breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air. "It's working," Claire exclaimed. They felt that. Encouraged, we moved systematically through the house, removing portraits and destroying them. With each one, the howling grew louder, the house shaking as if in the grip of an earthquake. We saved grandmother's portrait for last. It hung above the grand staircase, her eyes seemingly following our movements as we approached. Unlike the others, I felt a pang of regret as I reached for it. Despite what we had seen in the mirror, I couldn't quite shake the feeling that some part of our real grandmother might still be connected to this painting. "I'm sorry," I whispered as I lifted it from its hooks. As the portrait came free of the wall, a deafening crack split the air, followed by the sound of shattering glass from upstairs. "The mirror!" Claire gasped. We looked at each other in horror, then at the portrait in my hands. Without another word, I dashed it against the banister, splitting the canvas and breaking the frame. The house gave a final, violent shudder, then fell eerily silent. The temperature began to rise, the air losing its unnatural chill. "Is it over?" Claire asked hesitantly. I wasn't sure. "Let's check the special room." We climbed the stairs cautiously, alert for any sign of the entities that had been trying to break through. The door to the special room was still locked, but when I put my ear against it, I could hear nothing from inside. With trembling hands, I unlocked the padlock and pushed the door open. The room was transformed. The mirror in the center was shattered, shards of glass littering the floor around its broken frame. The portraits on the walls were all blank now, empty canvases in ornate frames. And there, kneeling amid the broken glass, was a figure we recognized immediately. "Grandmother," Claire whispered. The elderly woman looked up, her eyes clear and familiar. Not the predatory gaze we had seen in the mirror, but the warm, loving eyes we remembered from childhood. "Claire." "Edward," she said, her voice weak but unmistakably her own. "You freed us." We rushed to her side, helping her to her feet and carefully away from the broken glass. She felt solid, real, not a ghost or apparition, but flesh and blood. "How is this possible?" I asked. "We saw you. We buried you." Grandmother smiled sadly. "What you buried was an empty shell. My soul was taken by the mirror long before my body failed. Just like all the others." "The others?" Claire looked around the empty room. "Where are they?" "Gone," Grandmother said. "Freed from their prison. Those who were ready have moved on to whatever awaits beyond this life. Those who were not." She shuddered. "They were not human anymore. Not really. They had become something else, something hungry and cold. When the mirror shattered, they were destroyed." "But you survived," I said, still trying to process everything. Grandmother nodded. I held on to myself in there. It wasn't easy, but I remembered who I was, who I loved. She squeezed our hands. I knew you would come. I knew you would figure it out. The portraits, Claire said. They were the key all along. Yes, grandmother confirmed. William didn't understand the full power of the mirror when he acquired it. He thought the portraits were just a monitoring system, but they were much more. They were tethers, binding the souls to this world, preventing them from either moving on or fully escaping. So by destroying them, I said, you severed the connection. You set us free, grandmother said. She looked around the room one last time. This place has held so much sorrow for so long. But it's over now. The mirror is broken, its power gone. We helped grandmother downstairs, marveling at the impossible miracle of her return. There would be questions, of course, how to explain her reappearance to the world, what to do about her death certificate and estate. But those were problems for another day. For now, it was enough to sit in the kitchen, the most normal room in the house, drinking tea and listening to grandmother's soft voice as she filled in the gaps in our understanding of what had happened. The mirror, she explained, had origins much older and darker than even William had known. It had been created centuries ago by an alchemist obsessed with capturing souls, believing they were the key to eternal life. But the process had been flawed, the containment imperfect. Souls could be trapped, but they deteriorated over time, losing their humanity, becoming something else, something hungry for more souls to join them. William realized too late what he had brought into his home, grandmother said. By then, several family members had already been taken. He couldn't destroy the mirror, every attempt made it stronger, feeding off the energy of destruction. So he contained it instead, established the system of portraits to monitor its power, and passed the responsibility down through generations. To you, I said. Grandmother nodded. I intended to tell you both everything when the time was right. I never wanted this burden to fall to you unprepared. But... Her voice trailed off. But your portrait was already hanging when we arrived, Claire said. How long were you in there? Time works differently in the mirror, grandmother said, her eyes distant. What felt like years to me might have been only months out here. I don't know exactly when I was taken. I remember feeling drawn to the special room, compelled to uncover the mirror. I tried to resist, but... She shook her head. The next thing I knew, I was inside, watching the world through portraits and reflections, unable to reach out except in dreams and brief moments when the barrier weakened. We talked long into the night, processing everything that had happened, everything we had learned. By morning, we had reached a decision about the house and its dark history. We would clean up the evidence of our battle with the mirror, repair what damage we could, and then sell the property. With the mirror destroyed and the portraits gone, there was no longer any need for a Blackwood to maintain the house as a prison for captured souls. We could finally be free of the responsibility that had burdened our family for generations. Grandmother agreed, though with some melancholy. This has been our home for so long, she said. But perhaps it's time for a fresh start, without the shadows of the past hanging over us. In the weeks that followed, we quietly reintegrated grandmother into the world of the living, a task made easier by Mr. Peterson's connections in local government and our family's long-standing influence in the community. The official story involved mistaken identity and medical error, mundane explanations for a miracle that defied rational understanding. The house sold quickly, despite its age and remote location. The new owners were a young couple with dreams of turning it into a bed and breakfast. We didn't tell them about its history. With the mirror destroyed and the portraits gone, there was nothing left to haunt them. We kept only one item from the entire estate, the locket that had held the key to the special room. Grandmother wore it always, a reminder of what we had endured and overcome together. As for Claire and me, we found ourselves closer than we had been in years, bonded by our shared experience and the knowledge that we had faced something beyond ordinary understanding and survived. Sometimes, in dreams, I still see the faces in the mirror, pressing against the glass, hungry and cold. I wake with a start, heart pounding, reaching for the light. But the fear fades quickly now, replaced by the certainty that the nightmare is over. The portraits no longer watch us from the walls. The mirror no longer hungers for our souls. We are free. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Ghastly Journal. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more explorations of the unknown and unexplained. Until next time, I'm Edward Blackwood, reminding you that sometimes the most frightening truths lie hidden behind seemingly ordinary facades, or perhaps hanging right there on your wall.